Hi, I'm Tiffany Zhang, and I'm the host and founder of Undocumented History, an online video podcast. In today's episode 2, I will be speaking with Amy Lewis Hofland about her role as the Senior Director of the Crow Museum of Asian Art. The Crow Museum of Asian Art was established in 1998 by the Crow family because they wanted to keep their collection of Asian art as a legacy for their family and the public. In this interview, I will discuss with Amy Lewis Hofland about her leadership and vision for the museum, the possibility of an Asian American museum, and art's impact to help marginalized communities. Here's my conversation with her. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Undocumented History, an online video podcast focused on educating others about the importance of East Asian culture and history while also amplifying Asian voices and stories. I'm Tiffany Zhang, your host, and today we have a very special guest, Amy Lewis Hofland. Ms. Hofland is the Senior Director of the Crow Museum of Asian Art located at the University of Dallas. Ms. Hofland, thank you so much for being here today and taking the time to join me. Before we start, is there anything else that you wanted to add regarding to what you do and who you are?
Hi, Tiffany. It's so fun to spend some time with you. Thank you for this invitation and thank you for your work. It's so important to lift API voices and stories and opportunities, and I'm so honored that the Crow Museum can be part of what you're sharing with the world. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. So basically, I'm just going to jump in right with a few questions, and then I guess we'll kind of see how it goes from there. So I guess my first question is to establish a little bit of background information. What inspired you to take this job at the Crow Museum?
So it was very much by chance. It was almost 25 years ago. I was invited to an interview and I almost didn't take the interview. I did not think I was qualified. I had an art history degree from UT Austin, but I had not studied a lot of Asian art history or religion. But when I met Mr. Crow in an interview, and that's Trammell S. Crow, whose parents have the collection, and then he inherited the work of opening a museum. When I met him, I was very inspired because he said one thing to me, Tiffany, that really kind of moved me. He said, I don't know how else to explain why this museum is so important, other than to say that the migration of Asians and Asian Americans to North Texas is the single most important event of his lifetime. And at the time he was 50, and I thought that was so fascinating that he was thinking of the art in the collection, not around the idea of it's art and we're all going to enjoy it sort of surfacely, but that it had a very poignant and deep purpose to educate and inform and begin helping people have safe conversations around religion. And so that was appealing to me. That was kind of a museum different job. And the idea that education would be so integral to how we built stronger courage in having conversations around art. And I was really interested in that.
Wow, that's definitely so interesting. I guess I just find it super interesting that this job was more of chance and it wasn't you were
Yeah.
planning to go to the interview and planning to be oh yes, please, I want this job. I find that so fascinating for some reason. And as you said, I really like what Mr. Crow said about I guess Asian Americans migrating to North Texas being the most important part of his life. That's so interesting to me.
It really is. I mean, he
Yeah.
talks about how it'd be such a stimulus of the intellectual base and the economic base of our region, and it's true. I mean, with Toyota coming here in the last 10 years and major Asian companies looking at Dallas, he was right.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you took this job though, because I was looking at the website and I was just looking at all the art. I was it was so inspiring to me. And I think
Oh,
that
good.
yeah. So I guess my second question is, before this interview, I watched your interview on Visit Dallas and you talked about how part of your job as a director is to bring the best of the art to the museum. Can you kind of describe that process, I guess?
Yes, and that is probably the best and the hardest part of my job. To sort of scan the world, right, and to figure out what is not so much what is America's story about Asian art, but what is Dallas's Asian art history going to become. And I think our favorite thing to do is to give an Asian artist or an Asian American artist their first major show.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had several artists go on from the Crow who are now exhibited in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, or they've had major exhibitions at the Frist and at the Brooklyn Museum. And so we feel like we're a very accessible museum for rising artists and artists who have not had a platform yet. And so that's my favorite thing to do, is to really lift and support the contemporary artist that's just trying to make a break, right? And have a break.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's hard to do. And it requires a very rigid set of criterion,
Mm-hmm.
or criteria is the better word,
Mm-hmm.
criteria that we hold a commitment to it. You know, it
Mm-hmm.
has to be fresh. It has to have a sense of urgency.
Mm-hmm.
It has to, in our case, our museum really loves artists that harken back to tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So artists that are sort of reinterpreting and reimagining traditional
Mm-hmm.
arts and values of arts in Asia is something we like to see, because it really would be a standalone work of contemporary art that you
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't recognize as Asian. And so it's important that there's a teaching moment in the work, of what has influenced that artist today.
Mm-hmm.
And we also love wonder as a principle. And wonder is, in the Descartes definition that I like to use, the first of all passions.
Mm-hmm.
And so, is it an exhibition? Is it a story that will ask the viewer to ask more questions than to have answers to those questions? And so,
Mm-hmm.
wonder is another big element of what we look for.
Yeah, that's so interesting to hear. I really like the idea of like supporting smaller artists and not just trying to get like the ones that everyone already knows, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So I really like that concept, and I also like really like the concept of like I think you said something in the beginning about like thinking about like what is Dallas, so like I guess like focusing more on the region. Like I find that super interesting,
Mhm.
and yeah.
Yes.
So
And I'll just add, Tiffany, I'm also very conscious that I have to try twice as hard to
mhm.
authentically represent the Asian voice.
Mhm,
And I can't, right? I as a person of non-Asian descent, I can work on being a really great ally and
mhm,
hire great curators and great voices in art history. And so I feel like that's one of the things that I am conscious of the most,
mhm,
is that Trammell is not of Asian descent. I
mhm,
am not the University of Texas at Dallas leadership. They're not of Asian descent. And so it's really important to look for the places where we can fill the table with
mhm,
Asian voices and thought
mhm,
leaders.
yeah, just like I guess like kind of setting like trying to empathize, I guess in a way that's really
Yes,
inspiring.
it's really
Yes.
important.
So I guess like continuing on that, I guess you kind of talked about it before, but can you like talk a little bit more specifically about like I guess like the criteria for the art that you bring in the museum and like I guess like what your vision is for the museum?
Yes. So I think it's shifted a lot in the last 4 years now that we're part of a university. So
Mhm,
4.5 years ago, we were adopted by the University of Texas at Dallas. And it was a really, um, I think in history, when we look at the history of the Crow 50 years from now, it will be a very big turning point
mhm,
from how we were incubated for 20 years with the Crow family, with lots of support of our ideas to integrate communities inside the museum and bring communities of diverse backgrounds together and teach through the exhibitions, to a new platform, which is now the University of Texas at Dallas. So, really, our first focus, our first visitor is the student. And
mhm,
it's so fascinating that the student population at UTD has a high number of Asians and Asian Americans.
mhm,
And so, thinking of what will create a museum, which will open a year from now, what
mhm,
will create a museum that students will feel a sense of belonging to. And so,
mhm,
as we think about freshmen who are coming in, and even the international students too, how do we create stickiness, is how I like to talk about it, like a reason to come back.
mhm,
So that will be found in the
mhm,
exhibitions that
mhm,
have to be relevant, that have to be
mhm,
of the moment. And I'm not afraid to ask the hard questions in an exhibition and really talk about the issues and challenges facing an AAPI community.
mhm,
I think we're kind of known for brave conversations. And then I would say the programming.
mhm.
will be equally important. One of the things that I'm seeing, and we know this on a national level and international level, is the levels of student stress. And I think that has always been a question in my mind of what is this museum up to
Mhm,
in the human beingness of us all, right? Like
mhm,
our first location, which is in downtown Dallas, is located in the Dallas Arts District, and it's among all these towers. And
mhm,
I was always asking myself, how can we matter to the human beings that are working in these buildings, the thousands of human beings?
mhm,
And now I'm asking myself this question, how can we matter to the students? And we are going to need to matter in the world of stress relief and well-being.
mhm,
It's important to face the sort of socio-political issues facing AAPI, but I definitely
mhm,
also want to be a reservoir of peace
mhm,
and a place to find serenity and balance. So I think we'll continue the traditional programming we've had really now
mhm,
since maybe almost 20 years for
mhm,
yoga, mindfulness, Tai
mhm,
Chi, Qigong. There's so many beautiful artistic traditions in
mhm.
well-being that the Crow can present. So that I think that will continue too.
That's really cool. I like the idea of like being at a university where there's a lot of students, but like also being mindful that the stress on students is like super high these
Yeah,
days. And
it
also,
is. We can't ignore it.
yeah, and also just like listening to you talk, like I feel like I really like am starting to understand like why like the Crow Museum, like when I was looking at the website, like was so like fascinating, so like impressive to me that like you were able to cultivate such like an amazing museum for others to look at, but also have it be like a place of like calmness, like as you said. Like that's
Yes.
really, really cool and really I'm like really glad that you're doing this work.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess just moving forward, what is your favorite art piece at the Crow Museum?
Oh, that's like having to choose my children. That's a great question. There is a sculpture, and I'll send it to you in the follow-up. Maybe you can put it in the comments.
Yeah, I
And
will.
it was created in 2014. It was a commission from an artist in Shanghai named
Mhm,
Liu Yonggong, a
mhm.
Chinese artist. And it's 17 feet high. It's a
Oh.
symbol, calligraphy symbol.
Mhm,
It's three-dimensional
mhm,
metal with red and paint. But what he did is he blended three languages into one new character.
mhm,
And so the character is enlightenment or knowledge. And this, at
mhm,
one point, this was at the front door of the Crow downtown, but it's headed to campus. And it's the blend of Sino-Tibetan, Mongolian, and Mandarin
mhm,
languages. So
mhm,
he created a new character. And you can kind of see the antecedents of the
mhm,
forms of the characters in the final work of art.
mhm,
But I love that it's sort of a gateway piece to the collection, and I love what it means, this idea that knowledge is attained and you have to be in this sort of mode of inquiry to
mhm,
find it. And I love the idea that the Crow is a place to explore.
mhm,
And so
mhm,
it's kind of a perfect ambassador piece. It's
mhm,
very popular. It's very highly Instagrammed when it was up. And so I think it'll come back. And I also love this idea that none of us are pure
mhm,
and versions of ourselves, right? We're this beautiful blend of history and
mhm,
DNA and experience, and that includes the good and the bad, right?
mhm,
The good history and the
mhm,
traumatic histories of our lives. And so we
mhm,
all show up really perfectly imperfect,
mhm,
with this idea that we're the blending, and this museum is the blending of all of us.
mhm. Yeah, that's really I didn't see that on the website, but that sounds really
Yeah,
cool.
it's
Like
a great piece.
17 feet. I guess like my favorite piece of art, like I've never visited before, but when I was, well, because I live in Houston, but like when I was scrolling through like the website, I guess, I really like this piece of art called Rare Earth. I don't think it's on display right now.
Oh,
I'm
the
not sure.
exhibition Rare Earth.
Yeah, Rare
Mhm.
Earth, the art and science of Chinese stones. And I thought it was like really pretty, like all the colors and stuff. Like that personally was like my favorite, but I feel like I have to look at like your favorite, the 17.
Yes.
I feel like that one definitely.
Oh, the enlightened one. Yes.
Mhm,
So Rare Earth was such a great, like, it's a symbol of the new world now that we're part
mhm,
of a university. So we partnered with a professor of chemistry at
Mhm.
UTD, Dr. Bob Stern, and he and our curator, Jacqueline Chow,
Mhm.
selected works of art that really challenged the question, is it art or is it mineral?
Mm.
Is
Mhm.
it rock? And it's sort of honors the Chinese tradition of placing natural stones in a place of honor.
Mhm.
So, and jade, of course, has this
Mhm.
dual role as, is it art or is it mineral? And so
Mhm.
it was really fun exhibition to do.
That seems really
Kind of
cool.
what this it's like an Easter egg hunt at the
Mhm.
university when you realize there's this whole department that can help you curate an exhibition now. It's pretty amazing.
Mhm. Yeah, that's definitely really cool. So, I guess, like, moving on, why do you think it's important to have a museum dedicated specifically to Asian American artists or art?
And I love that question, Tiffany. Thank you for asking it. And representation.
Mhm.
This history of the globe, I think more than half of the population is in Asia.
Mhm.
The rising leadership that Asian Americans are offering the United States, the voices that have not been heard, the
Mhm.
artists, the poets, the writers, the filmmakers, the
Mhm.
musicians. There is a moment in time, and I believe that it is a community's responsibility to honestly
Mhm.
reflect the culture of
Mhm.
its citizens. And so I'm really proud that the Crow Museum is developing as the fourth largest Asian art museum in the United States. The history of Asian art collecting is so fascinating. I hope to write a book about it someday. But you've
Mhm.
got, New York with the Asia Society, the National Museum of the Asian, I'm sorry, the National Museum of Asian Art, which has been through a name change.
Mhm.
It was formerly the Sackler, and there's some really interesting movies about that and stories about that, books.
Mhm.
And then, of course, the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco.
Mhm.
So it seems fitting that Dallas and, of course, Houston is well known for the Asia Society satellite,
Mhm.
which is in the museum district in Houston. We love our partner museum down there. So I think it's incumbent upon this city, Dallas, which has been international for a long time. It has chosen Asian American architects for some
Mhm.
of its most preeminent buildings.
Mhm.
But to honor the culture in a individual way
Mhm.
is such a point. I've seen it over and over again,
Mhm.
such a point of pride,
Mhm.
for people to feel a sense of belonging and a sense of pride for the city they've chosen.
Yeah, definitely. I really agree with what you said about representation. I think it's really important to like represent minorities, I guess, in a way that sometimes like mainstream media fails to do. Like on a broader topic, I know that like there's a lawmaker called Grace Meng. I think she's like trying to establish an Asian American museum right now. And I think it's like just like you said, like I feel like we do need like a museum dedicated specifically to like Asian American history slash art because of like the representation. Just like I feel like without representation, like a lot of like I guess like younger Asian American generations, like if they don't see themselves represented, it might like I guess like hurt their potential or like hurt their self-esteem. So yeah, definitely like
Mhm.
like going back, like
Yeah.
representation.
There's also a group in Dallas called the Asian American Historical Society, and they
Oh.
are doing such incredible work. Stephanie Drinka
Mhm.
is one of the leaders, and they just had an exhibition called Leftover about sort of the history of Dallas and the entrepreneurial restaurateurs from Asia.
Mhm.
And I'm so proud of Stephanie because it's definitely grassroots, it's definitely from the heart. It's so authentic,
Mhm.
what they're putting together and really beginning to archive
Mhm.
Dallas's history, which is not always pretty. And it's important that we have the uncomfortable conversations about how Chinese Americans and Chinese were treated here around the turn of the century. So it's been great, and I hope that at some point Crow and this organization can come together and do something really impactful.
Yeah, that's so cool. I've never heard of that, but I feel like that I'll definitely be researching
Yeah,
that after
brand
this.
new.
Yeah. So, I guess my next question, like going back on like the art and stuff, like to what extent do you believe in art's impact to help, like I guess, marginalized groups, like not just limited to Asian Americans?
So I believe in compassion and action.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I have been tuned into since a meeting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama in 2015
Mhm.
in July, and it was a fascinating sort of turnaround moment for me where I watched him through 11 different presentations in 7 days.
Mm.
And every time he stood at the edge of the stage, and I think he's an important voice to study because so many different faiths and cultures and countries, citizens of the world really follow and believe in His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
Mhm.
So I was studying him as a leader, which is something I love to do. And
Mhm.
every time he ended a talk, whether he was with me alone or with 100 people or 10,000, he said, I need for you to pledge to put compassion into action. And I think this was something that was always inside of me as a leader, but I didn't reveal it until my study of compassion. I studied Karen Armstrong, who's written a great book called The 12 Steps to a More Compassionate Life.
Mhm.
And I believe that this ability to create art,
Mhm.
to appreciate art, is one of the human commonalities that connects us all. And it's
Mhm.
one of the places where we can feel a sense of interdependence on each other because we have all left these footprints for the future. That's how I
Mhm.
think about art, right? It's the
Mhm.
thing that we create
Mhm.
that is sort of sent to the future to archive the history of the past.
Mhm.
Um, and it it's truth. I think great art is telling the truth.
Mhm.
It's provoking a question, provoking a dialogue.
Mhm.
And so I believe that art museum directors have very important responsibilities
Mhm.
to do this in a way that is honest and thoughtfully
Mhm.
researched,
Mhm.
very with a lot of awareness for what are the what are the touch points that are hurtful to people and how do we navigate those conversations carefully so that everyone has a place in the museum. And I have personally adopted this principle of compassion. I call I think I'm now going to call it a practice, an art
Mhm.
practice, where I believe there is this place called Compassion, Texas. And the Crow Museum is part of it. This conversation is in Compassion, Texas. It's a metaphor. It's an ethereal place that we all sort of commit to be in,
Mhm.
where we listen deeply, we respect all points of view, we
Mhm.
push ourselves to be more honest in
Mhm.
conversation and talk about um, not just emotions, but how emotions really become facts, right? And what are facts? And so that's sort of one body of my work is that everything I do, and it's not easy, it's not pretty. Karen Armstrong says that a compassionate city is what is the word she uses? A compassionate city is an uncomfortable city.
Mhm.
And so it's being willing to sit in that space of uncomfortable for a little bit longer is something I hope to do every day. And it's not perfect. Um,
Mhm.
but I that's my work, and I
Mhm.
love to source exhibitions
Mhm.
that in some ways teach us new avenues of for compassion.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
So
Yeah, definitely. I think compassion is as well, it's always important, but I feel like it's especially important in today's age. I feel like with like the political divide and also like social media, I guess, like I feel like that has caused a lot of people to be uncompassionate. So yeah, definitely. I feel like compassion is definitely really we feel like this is a time where we really need it, and I find it great that you're like part of Compassion Texas.
yes.
And I guess this is like going back to the art thing, like I definitely do believe that art can help marginalized groups. I feel like an example of this, like I just like suddenly thought of it when you were talking. It's Guernica by Pablo
Mhm.
Picasso. Like his I feel like his painting helped shed light on the cruelties of like the bombings and like the whole war, I guess. So,
I
yeah.
totally agree, and it was he put himself at great risk to bring all of that to the canvas. I
Mhm.
think the modern day version of that is Ai Weiwei, and I
Mhm.
can recommend 2 films, Human Flow
Mhm.
and Never Sorry are both two really important movies. I would encourage anyone who's landed here in this broadcast to go and watch and think about.
Mhm.
We're working on a project with Ai Weiwei right now. He is, of course, a Chinese American. Well, he's a Chinese artist who
Mhm.
has lived for some decades in America. He's either in China or in Berlin right now.
Mhm.
But he does have a very important voice to the world right now with points of view on immigration,
Mhm.
points and human flow, which is sort of the idea that we're all moving around the planet all the time, is a fascinating expression of I think, what we should be thinking about in how we treat each other,
Mhm. Yeah,
regardless of
definitely.
where we come from.
Mhm. And I guess, like,
So,
before we
yeah,
yeah. I guess
it's
before we
courage. Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good. Also, I guess, like, last question before we end, I guess, like, what do you think defines Asian American art?
Oh, that's a great question. So when I think about it in the context of the Crow Museum,
Mhm.
we like to represent artists who have Asian heritage,
Mhm.
so of Asian descent.
Mhm.
And we've had both, international exhibitions with Asian artists, and we've had Asian Americans here. And we define Asia very broadly. We kind of adopt the Asia Society's definition of Asia. So we go all the way into the Middle East. We kind of go
Mhm.
beyond South Asia, beyond India, we've had some wonderful exhibitions of far West Asia.
Mhm.
And so, I think the other thing that we really want to see tradition again, like this idea that where I come from shows up in my story and shows
Mhm.
up in my message and in my art.
Mhm.
And it's not that explicit all the time, but it's there, and it's definitely there in the curatorial message too,
Mhm.
so that every exhibition has this capacity to teach and
Mhm.
help others understand issues that people are facing, and
Mhm.
what we need to be talking about in 2023.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I guess, like, something for me that defines Asian American art is, I guess, like what you said, tradition, but I also feel like a lot of Asian art has like nature in it, and also like I guess like
Yeah.
jade and like ritual bronze and stuff. So yeah,
Yes,
that
some
was just
great
like
themes.
my mhm.
Yeah, and occasionally, maybe 4 or 5 times, we've honored an ally, and allyship is something that I wish
Yeah.
more non-Asians would learn about,
Mhm.
how to be a good ally, and so we have honored the work of allies who
Mhm.
really deeply, authentically appreciate,
Yeah.
themes of Asia. We haven't done that as much lately, and maybe that's something we're sort of leaning away from because there are plenty of places for non-Asians to exhibit their art, and the Crow really I believe, owes the Asian American community, the first place.
Mhm. That's so interesting. So, yeah, I feel like we had a very interesting conversation today. Thank you so much for coming on and speaking with me, Miss Hofland. And thank you so much to everyone at home watching. Yeah, so I will see you guys next time. Bye.
Thank you so much. Really beautiful work. Thank you,
You're
Tiffany.
welcome.